Studio by EFF Deputy President Floyd Shivambu. Mr. Shivambu, thank you very much indeed for your time. I've seen your statement, the EFF rejecting President Ramaphosa's national executive. Why?
Now, look, I think the context of our rejection of the still bloated cabinet of President Ramaphosa is that, one, currently South Africa has got a budget deficit of more than 200 billion rands, meaning that like expenditure items that have been allocated there's 200 billion shortfall in terms of what is needed. And overall, South Africa is in a debt of more than now almost 3 trillion rands. That is like now approaching 60% of South Africa's GDP. So we're in a crisis in terms of resources. That is why we have always emphasized that in terms of unnecessary expenditures, the state has to be frugal. It has to take a different approach in terms of how do you reduce unnecessary expenditures? And we believe very strongly that deputy ministers who do not have any executive functions cannot be part of an executive. Like, it's not necessary, because it's not like a deputy minister has got any specified role in many instances. They are just some glorified executive personal assistants of ministers. They cannot be given any function. When a minister is absent, they cannot even act as a minister. So it's just a waste of money, because when you have got 36 deputy ministers, it means that you must have 36 support staff in Pretoria, in Cape Town, houses, security, cars, everything else. That then bloats the amounts that are going to be expended on an unnecessary function. It doesn't add any value. There are far much bigger countries in the world that are operating with far much lesser people than South Africa is trying to do now. Sure, it doesn't add any developmental value.
Some are saying, I get your point, where the smaller the cabinet, the bigger the results. This cabinet has been reduced in terms of ministers, from 36 to 28. Do you not buy the argument that these deputy ministers, some of them, 2 of them being appointed, will do more in terms of this? The workload is such that you need 2 deputy ministers.
Look, you know that there was a far much smaller cabinet when President Mandela was President of the Republic, and it gradually grew. Under President Zuma, it was far much bigger. It never improved services and service delivery in South Africa. It never grew the economy. It never contributed to the developmental agenda. So to expand a cabinet or to expand deputy ministers doesn't add any value. And there is scientific empirical proof here in South Africa that such doesn't add any value. You've got a country like China, which has got a population of 1.5 billion people. It's got a cabinet which is smaller than South Africa, but its economy has never grown at less than 8% for the past 15 or even 20 years. There's a clear management, because the role of a minister is not to be an administrator to deal with day-to-day functions. It's to give a strategic policy framework and guideline and oversight of the administration of the department. So ministries do not have to be overpopulated. They need a clearer, common and cogent vision that must be articulated by one minister. So when you populate ministries, it's a waste of resources. It's a way of trying to balance factions in the ruling party. It's a way of trying to please people to say, no, we're just going to dedicate it to you, benefits and perks for no specific reason. It doesn't help. If anything, what has to be strengthened in South Africa now is the legislative arm of the state, which is parliament. We still have got more than 3,000 laws that were passed under apartheid that are still in existence in South Africa. Why don't we concentrate these people in the legislature to be the ones who are in committees and are responsible for passing the laws and repealing the laws that were passed under apartheid, instead of having a bloated executive that doesn't add any value? We have illustrated, actually it's out there for everyone to see that a bloated cabinet doesn't add any value. It is just derailing things. It is just taking from the little money which is there. It is actually taking from the crisis levels of debt which South Africa is experiencing currently.
I know that EFF called for the complete removal of deputy ministers. You place a lot of emphasis on the DJs, and many people will not argue with you in terms of the workload that the director generals do in their department. But in your statement, you say, I just want to read this, you say you reject the cabinet and take it as a declaration of war and the EFF will respond decisively.
Look, part of the statement of the EFF says that we reject the inclusion of Pravin Gordhan in cabinet in terms of what was announced yesterday. So the public protector has found that Pravin Gordhan has violated the constitution. You know, when we raised the issue of Jacob Zuma violating the constitution in parliament around the issues of Nkandla, a lot of people were saying we're playful, and ultimately we illustrated that he has violated the constitution, and his ultimate departure before the end of his term was because of the pressure of the economic freedom fighters. Now, Pravin Gordhan has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt that he has violated the constitution by approving a pension when he did not have the powers to do so of his friend, and by trying to undermine the existing laws in terms of how pension funds must be managed. Pension funds that by design are not meant to take care of immediate expenses. His personal historical friend, Ivan Pillay, says that I've got a problem of school fees and this and that. Please cash my pension, but continue to employ me. And Pravin Gordhan does that, knowing that the long-term consequences of that will be all public servants who have got short-term difficulties in terms of finances, raiding the GPF, bankrupting it and bankrupting the state, because that GPF money and the money which is invested in the PIC is guaranteed by the state. If it is raided, it is finished, all of them. The state will have to come in. So Pravin Gordhan has violated the constitution, has undermined the integrity of the state, has wasted taxpayers' money in service of his friend. And then the president still goes ahead and appoints him as a minister against the findings of the public protector.
Well, let's look at that.
And that is one thing that we are really not going to be agreeing with. And we then say that if the president undermines the constitution, he doesn't deserve respect from anyone.
Mr. Pravin Gordhan has a cloud over his head with regards to this report from the public protector. Legally speaking, help me understand this, because I've been getting mixed reaction with regards to this. Legally speaking, the fact that Mr. Gordhan has launched this review application in the High Court on Tuesday, does that not mean that this report is in abeyance? No, you must read the Constitutional Court judgment on the EFF versus the Speaker of the National Assembly. It says, as part of the ruling there, that the powers and the remedial actions of the public protector are binding until they've been set aside by a court of law, not until there's been an application for review. So it's a different discourse altogether. There is opportunism that is going out there by people who are sponsored elsewhere, who are trying to create a picture that immediately you put the review application, the remedial actions and the findings are set aside. The public protector's findings and remedial actions are binding until they are set aside by a court of law. There is no court of law as of now that has set aside the findings and the remedial actions on Pravin Gordhan. And the findings is that he has violated the constitution. And how do you appoint a person who effectively has violated the constitution? You are undermining the state, you are undermining the integrity of the democratic project. And that is one thing that we are taking issue with, fundamentally with Cyril Ramaphosa, that it is not acceptable. You will never gain respect from us if he deliberately and willingly undermines the constitution in the manner in which he is doing now with the appointment of Pravin Gordhan. Well, no doubt we're going to be talking about this for weeks and months to come. With regards to the economy, that's the key here. Pravin Gordhan forms part of this economic cluster that is trying to forge ahead. Tito Mboweni as finance minister, what do you make of his appointment?
Look, Tito Mboweni has got his own limitations in terms of the broad ideological direction and framework. He believes in neoliberal policies and politics. But we welcome and note the appointment of a Deputy Minister, David Masondo, because his ideological orientation is diametrically different to what Tito Mboweni stands for. Because Tito Mboweni doesn't mind to even defy the resolutions of his own organizations. His own organization has resolved on the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. And you know that in terms of the mandating ministries, the National Treasury is the one that should cooperate in the legislation that must nationalize the Reserve Bank, must create a state bank, and then must create a sovereign wealth fund as well. So, and Tito Mboweni is not very clear in terms of where he stands. Majority of the times, he sides with the capitalist. So we think that in terms of the inclusion of David Masondo, there might be some change. They just have to be emphasis in terms of those that give mandate. But one of the things that is over-exaggerated about the role of Pravin Gordhan is in the economic cluster. When he was a Minister of Finance, there was never any meaningful growth. He was a minister under Jacob Zuma, there was never any meaningful growth. He was given public enterprises. People are praising him, over-glorifying him. But Eskom's debt now is approaching R500 billion. There's no clear mechanism in terms of how that is going to be dealt with. Executives everywhere where he is deployed are falling, and the result of that is not stabilization of those state-owned companies. It is just further destabilization. Transnet was doing relatively well, and then he goes there on a crusade of exterminating black executives. Transnet is not doing well now. All the companies under his oversight are always faltering because he portrays a picture that he's a champion against corruption, but there's nothing meaningful that is coming out of it, and the numbers speak to that. Eskom is not stabilizing, Transnet is not stabilizing, and all the entities, SA Express is not stabilizing, SAA is not stabilizing. And that is under his oversight. But now we're told that Pravin Gordhan is a champion against corruption. He's going to stabilize state-owned companies. That is not true. It doesn't make any scientific
and some analysts are saying the true test would be whether things change in terms of policy of the ministers in the economic cluster, or it remains the same. Speaking about finance ministers, maybe it's a good segue. Let's talk about a former finance minister, Trevor Manuel, and the court case with regards to the EFF. What's the latest there?
Look, man, Trevor Manuel just lodged an extremely frivolous court case against a correct observation by the economic freedom fighters that he was conflicted in interviewing SARS commissioner. The current SARS commissioner is a personal friend of Trevor Manuel. He admits that in the court papers, his response papers to the economic freedom fighters. He admits that this is my friend. I actually stepped aside. I didn't ask him questions during the interview process, but I adjudicated. And that is the issue which we raised in the press statement of the EFF, that why do you participate in the process of appointing a SARS commissioner, one, in secret, and two, knowing that your friend has applied there, and you're clearly conflicted. And when we raise that, he says we're defaming his character. The court is going to dismiss him with contempt because he has never proven any case. He has actually admitted to exactly the same thing that we said he was not supposed to be involved in. And by the way, these are the issues that we raised in Parliament, we raised with the President, we raised with the Standing Committee on Finance, that you cannot have the interviews of a SARS commissioner in secret, and you cannot have people who are conflicted participating in that. So that is basically what we had raised.
We will no doubt keep a close eye on that court case. I want to just get back to the current national executive, and a name that jumps out of the page for many, and many have been surprised by this appointment, is Patricia de Lille. She did pretty well in terms of having about 4 months or so in preparation to the national elections, picking up about 2 seats in the National Assembly. What do you make of her appointment?
Look, she was appointed because of her own agreement with Cyril Ramaphosa. They seem to have some cordial relationship and understanding. You saw when we were even congratulating the newly elected president in Parliament, the manner in which the interaction was. You could see that they've had a cordial relationship that dates back to 1994, coming this way. It's their own politics. We respect Patricia de Lille as a political leader. She's a person of her own conviction. She's firm. She's not easily swayed. She's not a puppet of white supremacists that used to work with her in the Democratic Alliance. So we respect her as an individual, and we think that with the role that she has been given, she's going to serve the people of South Africa with integrity. There are a lot of immediate issues that have to be dealt with in public works, and one of those is to insource all the workers that work in government properties. The other issue is to make sure that government owns the buildings that it utilizes for offices. So government permanently needs offices, but almost all government departments, including at a basic level, is renting properties. You'll be surprised that even police stations, it's rented property. So like government is a tenant in an area where there's a police station. So there must be an immediate project under Patricia de Lille to then purchase and have ownership of the state of all the properties that the state is utilizing on a constant basis. So we respect her, and of course it's out of their own political dealings. We wouldn't have done it ourselves as the EFF, but she did it. Good luck to her.
Good luck to her. Emphasize the good in the luck. Listen, one of the considerations that we've been talking about with regard to Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet or national executive is the generational mix. Somebody that you know quite well, Ronald Lamola, now the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services. What's your take on his appointment?
Look, we welcome and note the inclusion of Ronald Lamola in the executive. He is part of our generation in the Congress movement. So he is part of the generation of economic freedom fighters that fought for economic emancipation. So we note and we welcome his appointment. And you know that throughout, even when the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF spoke in congratulatory messages to the President, part of the calls and advices to the President was that you must include younger blood into the executive. Get rid of all these 1994 people who are not adding any value. They've been given 25 years to govern South Africa, to rule over South Africa, and they have not brought about meaningful change. And we're beginning to then see the inclusion of younger generation into the executive. That we welcome. It's a step in the right direction. The spoiler is Pravin Gordhan, who has violated the Constitution and was never supposed to be part of the executive. And if there's going to be a review process, the President was going to consider him if a court of law finds out that he did not violate the Constitution.
The EFF has increased their seats in Parliament, in the National Assembly. What are we going to experience this time around the 6th administration? Are we going to see similar scenes to the 5th?
Look, you know, the EFF in the 5th Parliament was a qualitative majority, despite that we had only 25 seats in terms of providing direction to Parliament, in terms of policy shifts, in terms of holding the executive to account. We did better than all other political parties in the 5th Parliament. And now with increased numbers, we're going to do even better, because we are certainly going to sit in all committees. We are not going to have the limitations which we had in the 5th Parliament of one member having to sit in 2 or 3 committees, because there were 36 ministries and there are many other committees that are there in Parliament, and we're only 25. So now each and every committee, the EFF is going to be represented. So all departments, all ministries must know that there will be a commissar, there will be a fighter who will be closely watching each and every step that they take. We will never close one eye in terms of oversight of all executive functions in the executive. So our quantitative growth will just expand our qualitative contribution to the 6th Parliament.
Floyd Shivambu, thank you very much indeed for coming through, for your time and your perspective. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for having us.
All right, that was Floyd Shivambu from the EFF, giving us his take on the national executive picked by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Okay, let's go now to